This is called tie-ins and tie-outs. Without them, your embroidery will fall apart. Here's how to set them up for solid, long-lasting embroidery designs. Did you know that 90% of successful embroidery comes down to how well the design is made? If you're new and don't understand how designs actually work, you're going to keep messing up. You'll waste time, you'll waste thread, and you'll ruin the items you're embroidering on. That's why we made the 101 Digitizing course. It's free, it's fast, and it gives you the core theory every embroiderer needs. Even if you never plan to digitize, this is the stuff you have to know if you want to get clean, professional results. Get started today by clicking the link in the description. Now, the easiest way to explain tie-ins and tie-outs is to simply show you. So I'm going to bring you into our EL software and I'm going to show you an example of two very simple objects that are created identically, but within the properties, one has the tie-ins and outs, and you can see a tie-out right here with a trim function and a tie-in, which is right here. The second object, this one right here, this has absolutely no tie-ins or tie-outs within the properties. If I were to select this and I go to my properties, I can see that tie-in and tie-off are both set to none. Now, you have to remember that an embroidery machine works on the principles of a thread, a top thread, and a bobbin thread. They react with each other with tension, which is the way the thread is actually held into the fabric. If there's nothing really tying in your first few stitches into the design, the machine just starts, even though most modern machines are kind of preset to make a couple of stitches in the same place. It'll usually do at least one extra stitch to try and compensate for designs that don't have tie-ins or tie-outs. It really isn't enough to actually secure the thread to the material because the bobbin and the thread have to connect. Within this one, there's absolutely no tie-ins and tie-outs, which means that the design is going to actually start right here. It's going to start at the top, goes down to the bottom, and then it's going to actually finish at the bottom and just tie out. So there's a trim command, and then this is the tie-in. You can see a little tie-in stitch right here, and then we have some underlay. Now, this isn't a lesson on underlay, but a lot of times, even if you don't have a tie-in, but there is underlay, that will assist with, I guess, not losing any stitches that might be important. And by important stitches, I'm talking about the stitches that are visual. You don't want to have this actually finish down here at the bottom. If you don't have any tie-outs, you'll probably be able to just pull this thread and literally unravel the design. Same thing with the tie-in. If it ties in right here at this top corner and just starts stitching right away, it could potentially loop and there's no underlay holding it down. You might be able to snag that and literally pull it. So tie-ins and tie-outs are insurance policies to make sure that your designs actually will embroider and will, hold into the fabric and not have any pulling on the designs. Now, within the second object, if I select it, you'll see that there is a couple of things that are actually there. Number one, there is a tie-in or a tie-on, and you do have an option to have what's called a basic, which runs the same direction as the stitches. So I can see that right here, if I actually zoom into my actual screen, I can see some little tiny stitches. That's your tie-in stitches right there. If I go in and I change this to a triangle, you're going to see that now it's changed into a little triangle motion. Now, this is something where the default, in my opinion, can always be left to a basic. A basic will actually work fine. The machine likes to just have movement back and forth, but the triangle, sometimes I might use that on a fill area. The machine generally likes as much X and Y movement as possible, meaning it likes to move in multiple directions. And I remember in the old days when I was a puncher, whenever I started within an object, I would usually do a little triangle and then continue on, because the X and Y motion of the machine would ensure that the bobbin really held tightly. If you're just going in one direction, if you're just going on an X or on a Y, it might not catch as good. With the other stitch here, which I'm looking now at, I'm going to go right up here to the tie out. The tie out stitch, which I can see right here, is at the very, very top of the object. And this is something I also don't like to see. Your software, will place the tie-outs wherever your last object is, so it sees this as the end point, your start and stop, so it decided to put it here. Our software does have closest join features, so it will try to assist, how it paths to join at the closest point. But if I ever see a design that does this, I don't like to have the tie-out stitch right there at the very top of a letter I, because it's going to have that little back and forth motion, and it's going to create, I guess, a visual distraction to the design. So if I were to look at this object, and it does have underlay in there, it does have a tie-in and an out, but if I look at this and I go to move my start and stop points, I would much rather have my stop point come down into the object. So now it's down a stitch. I always like, if at all possible, to have my tie-outs tie out into an object, not at the very end of an object. So if I look at the 3D now, it's kind of hidden and sunken into the stitch. If I looked at it before, it was right at the very top, and that could and would be a visual distraction of the design. So you do have different options within most software of whether you want to have a classic tie-in and tie-out, which is this method that we see right here, or if you do want to have a triangle, which I might use in an area that is a little wider like a fill. I believe that this is, pretty much exactly 4.4 millimeters with the pull compensation, which does make sense because it's a 4 millimeter stitch with 0.2 millimeters of pull comp on either side. And if I were to do a 1 millimeter stitch, then that little tie triangle that's here probably might not be the most effective way. I'd want to make sure that I use a classic. On wider options, I could use a triangle, but we have it set up as a default so that it's always going to use the classic method. 99% of the time, that's going to be fine. Things were a lot different 40 years ago when I first started than they are today. The machines have assisted in it, but still with your software, you should understand why there is a tie-in and a tie-out function, which type you could possibly use, and where they should be placed within a design so that they will not be a visual distraction. Now, I did digitize a quick little design here, and I made sure that I pathed it correctly, meaning that I have traveling stitches between my objects. I'm avoiding as many trims as possible, and I use tie-ins and tie-outs on all of the objects within my designs. And then I took that same design and I copied it and I pasted it, and I turned off all of the tie-ins and tie-outs, so there's no longer any, I guess, insurance policy put there. And I also took out all of the traveling stitches, so the machine would be forced to jump into each object. And you will notice if I end up taking this now and I, visually look at this and I get rid of the stitches for a second, so I will tell it to not view the stitches, you're going to see that there's a lot less little trim commands within the first one, and there's a lot more trim commands within the second. So that means there's going to be objects, and if these ones tie in and out, I know it's going to be fine. With all of these, there's going to be added objects, added jumps and trims to the design, and none of them are going to tie in and out. Now, before I send that to the machine to run, I'm just going to come in, I'll turn the 3D on, and I'm going to do a slow redraw of the actual design. And I do like to do a redraw of designs before I send it to the machine, because a lot of times I can find out issues if I've forgotten something, if a start and stop needs to be changed, if something's out of sequence, I can catch it before it actually goes to the machine. And if you're not the operator, if you're just the digitizer, then a mistake could get by you and you wouldn't even know that it happened. So if I look at this one here, this is the object that I did, and I did put some manual underlay there. In some of our education, I talk about having, I guess, manual underlay put down to ensure that you get better registration and to ensure that things that are outlined, you don't see fabric showing through. So the fill stitch is going to be pretty much the same on both of these, but this is where it changes. All of these objects where it goes from here to here, I actually don't have any tie-ins or tie-outs. There is underlay. I left the underlay on for all these, but you can see that it jumped into that object, and then it's going to continue to jump into all of these objects and not actually travel between them. Whereas in the next design that I did, I have the same thing, but you're going to notice that when I get to that next color, it's actually going to start to travel between the objects and not just jump or trim. So when I get right to about here, you're going to see that I have traveling stitches. It's going to do this object, and then it's going to continue to stitch, and it will then, do the next object there, travel over. So I'm avoiding all of the jumps and trims because I'm traveling underneath of objects that are yet to be completed. That black outline around the very outside of the design is the perfect place to hide stitches during the digitizing process, so I get a more production-friendly design. They will look identical on screen, they'll look identical when you load it into your machine, but as I've always said, the proof is in the stitching. Now, I pretty much got the results that I was looking for. I actually digitized this design for success, and then I edited it for failure. And you can see that I could pull out stitches on the design, and there's little pieces hanging. If you've ever seen things like that happen with a design that you've digitized or one that you've purchased, it's probably because the digitizer did not know how to use the tie-ins and tie-outs properly, as well as path the design so that it is machine friendly. If you enjoyed this video and you're ready to start creating, you'll love the Embroidery Legacy software. It makes creating your own designs simple, and we've built in the expert training to guide you every step of the way. Check out the link in the description if you're ready to take the next step in your embroidery journey.